All right, diving into Erwin Schrodinger, the cat in a box guy. We've got a biography here, some physics from the early 1900s. Looks like even some philosophy. This is going to be a wild one. But before we get lost in equations, want to start with the man himself. Who was this Schrodinger beyond, the science superstar?
Well, it's funny. Yeah, he was very much a product of his time, but also kind of rebelling against it. Born in 1887, right? As
Yeah.
that whole Austro-Hungarian Empire was starting to crumble.
Talk about a time of change, huh?
Oh, yeah, huge upheaval coming. But also, Vienna was this hub of ideas, artistic energy.
Right. I mean, even just reading his basic bio, it's like contradiction is his middle name. Poetry lover, physics whiz, Eastern philosophy, ND super concrete science. It's a lot.
You're spot on. And that duality, that push and pull, it's key to understanding him. Schrödinger was soaked in 19th century thought, but then boom, he's a huge AE player in the quantum revolution.
Which is crazy why to think about, right? Because the
Yeah.
quantum stuff, that's like the future of physics.
It is, and yet he had his doubts about it,
Mm.
even as he was shaping it.
Whoa, hold up. You're saying the guy who helped make quantum mechanics wasn't even sure about it? That's like inventing the car, but then being all, nah, I prefer horses.
Yeah, kind of. But it shows you the complexity of the man. And to be honest, a lot of it, this back and forth, it might go back to his childhood. Born in Vienna, only child, well-off family, totally doted on by his mom, aunts, the whole bit.
Sounds like a comfy upbringing, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Very comfortable, even maybe a bit sheltered.
Though the outline mentions something about a philanderer theory, something about his upbringing being connected to that. What's the story there?
So some biographers, like Dennis Friedman, they suggest that all that doting early on, especially from the mom, might have, impacted his relationships with women later in life.
Ah, so it shaped how he saw relationships as an adult, not like a direct cause, but maybe a contributing factor.
Exactly. Definitely something to keep in mind as we dig deeper. And even as a teenager, he had this intense crush on his friend's sister Lotte. And later on, this close family friend Georgie, she became his long-term mistress.
Okay, so we're already seeing a pretty complicated picture here. Not just the science genius, but the whole person. But rewind a bit. The outline says he was homeschooled until he was 10, then went to this super secular gymnasium in Vienna, and get this, consistently top P of his class. Languages, poetry, math, physics, the whole 9 yards.
You got it all, yeah. Though there's this funny tidbit. Apparently, the only question he ever got wrong in school was about the capital of Montenegro.
Even geniuses have their off days, right? But all jokes aside, this guy was clearly firing on all cylinders. Close friends, loved cycling, total theater buff, even kept detailed notes on the plays he saw, like mini reviews.
Sounds like he really threw himself into life,
Yeah.
into learning,
Huh.
which makes what happens next even more, well, impactful. Early 1900s, World War I kicks off. That changes everything.
Right. The outline says he ended up an artillery officer on the Italian front. No more carefree cycling trips at that point.
No, absolutely not. Schrödinger saw some heavy combat, but incredibly, even in the trenches, he still found time to study.
Wow. That's some serious dedication. But I can't imagine how tough those warriors must have been. Not just the fighting, but seeing his whole world, that empire he grew up in, fall apart.
Yeah, the post-war period in Vienna was rough. Food shortages,
Yeah.
political chaos. And personally, he lost his mentor, Fritz Hasenroll, who died in a battle leading an infantry charge.
Oh, man. That's awful. To lose someone you admire like that, it must have been devastating.
It was a tough period.
Yeah.
But through all that, his scientific journey kept going. And remember, he was super into Ludwig Boltzmann and statistical mechanics.
Right. Boltzmann, the outline mentioned him. One of the early guys thinking about atoms and statistics way before quantum mechanics was a thing, right?
Exactly. Boltzmann laid the groundwork for so much of what came later. And it's amazing to see how Schrödinger kept building on that, even when he, had his doubts.
Wait, really? Doubts about physics? What was that about?
Love life, actually.
Huh.
Seems he was smitten with this woman, Felicie Krauss, and actually considered ditching academia to be with her.
Wow, talk about a fork in the road. Lucky for physics, he stuck with it. So back to science. He starts climbing that academic ladder, research on color vision, atmospheric electricity, even radioactivity. He did it all.
Oh yeah, incredibly versatile. And all this while battling tuberculosis, which forced him to take time off, recover in the Swiss Alps.
Tuberculosis, that must have been terrifying back then. I'm noticing a pattern here. This guy faced some serious challenges, personal and professional, but always found a way to keep going.
Resilience, for sure. And it's that resilience that eventually led him to, well, one of the biggest scientific shifts ever, the quantum revolution.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff, the quantum realm. But before we dive into Schrödinger's big breakthrough, can we do a quick recap? Like, who are the major players before him? For those of us who need a quantum refresher course.
Absolutely. It wasn't like quantum mechanics just appeared overnight. It was this build-up starting in the late 1800s where these cracks started appearing in classical physics. One of the first guys to notice something was up was Max Planck, working on something called black body radiation. He was trying to figure out how hot objects emit light, and what he found, kind of by accident, was that energy wasn't being released smoothly. It was in these little packets. He called them quanta.
Quanta, the heart and soul of quantum mechanics, right? Like the fundamental little Lego block of it all.
Exactly. And what Planck was saying, even though he kind of resisted it at first, was that energy might be quantized, meaning it's not continuous, like think of a smooth flow of water, but it comes in these little chunks.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So Planck stumbles onto these energy packets, then Einstein comes along and he...
Einstein takes those quanta and RUNS with them, uses them to explain the photoelectric effect, which is how shining light on metal can knock electrons loose. What he realized was that light itself, which we always thought of as this wave, could also be thought of as these little bundles of energy, these quanta of light, now called photons.
Light as a particle. Mind blown. So now we've got energy NED light being reimagined as these quanta things. What happens next in our quantum story time?
Well, next up is Niels Bohr, who's trying to solve the mystery of why atoms are stable. Like, why don't electrons just spiral into the nucleus and cause the whole thing to collapse? His solution, building on these earlier quantum ideas, was that electrons can only exist in very specific energy levels within the atom. They can't just be anywhere they please.
So like restricted to certain orbits, certain energy levels, like those energy packets you mentioned. They can jump between them, but can't just hang out in between.
Exactly. And those jumps, those quantum jumps, are what produce the specific colors of light we see when, say, we heat up a gas.
So we've got Planck with his quanta, Einstein saying, hey, maybe light's a particle too, and Bohr explaining atoms with these quantum jumps. It's all starting to fit together. But where does Schrödinger, our guy, fit into all this? Wasn't his big contribution that wave equation thing?
You got it. And it's a fascinating story of how he got there. See, he was asked to give a presentation on the work of this guy, Louis de Broglie, who had this pretty radical idea. Maybe particles, like electrons, they also have wave-like properties.
Hold on, both waves and d particles. Doesn't that break, like, all the rules?
It does seem that way, doesn't it? And this is where it gets really interesting. Schrödinger, at first, was skeptical of this whole wave-particle duality. He wasn't comfortable with the idea of these sudden quantum jumps, these shifts, and he was looking for a more, intuitive way to explain what was going on in the quantum world.
So what did he do? The outline mentions he came up with his famous wave equation during a Christmas holiday. Was there some romance involved, fueling his scientific fire?
Let's just say Schrödinger had a way of finding inspiration in different areas of his life. But the important thing is, he took de Broglie's idea, developed it mathematically, and bam, the Schrödinger wave equation was born. This new way of looking at quantum mechanics.
So instead of thinking of particles jumping between energy levels, he's describing them as waves.
In a sense, yes. But the wave equation doesn't actually describe the particle itself. It describes the probability of finding it in a particular place. It's a way to capture mathematically the inherent fuzziness of the quantum world.
Probability.
Yeah.
Uncertainty. Those are some of the big ideas that really separate quantum mechanics from classical physics, right? It's not about making precise predictions. It's about possibilities.
Exactly. And Schrödinger's wave equation gave physicists this powerful tool to calculate those possibilities, to make sense of how atoms and particles behave in this completely new way.
It's mind-blowing. We've gone from these little cracks in the foundation of classical physics to this whole new framework for understanding the universe at its most fundamental level. And Schrödinger, who was initially skeptical of some of these early quantum ideas, ends up playing a crucial role in helping us grasp them.
It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? And his journey is just getting started. Armed with his wave equation, he's about to head to Berlin, the epicenter of the scientific world at that time, where he'll face new challenges, new discoveries, and new controversies.
Berlin, the big leagues. Can't wait to dive into that next time.
So, picking up where we left off, Schrödinger is on his way to become professor of theoretical physics in Berlin, taking over for the one and only Max Planck. Pretty impressive for a guy who almost ditched physics altogether.
Right, what a turnaround. But the outline mentions he actually hesitated before accepting the Berlin offer. Why would anyone say no to that? It's like, work the dream job, right?
It seems he had a few concerns, yeah. He was worried about leaving his position in Zurich. Maybe not as prestigious, but it offered more stability. Plus the whole Berlin scene, that scientific intensity, might have been a little intimidating, even for him.
I get it. Berlin in the 1920s, it was like the scientific A-team. Einstein, Planck, all those heavy hitters already there. Stepping into that, it must have felt like, I don't know, joining a rock band at the peak of their fame?
Exactly, high pressure, right. But there's another layer to this. Schrodinger's personal life. Remember all those, shall we say, complicated relationships we talked about? Moving to Berlin would shaken things up quite a bit on that front, too.
Ah, yes, those tangled love affairs. Always a recurring theme with him, it seems. But ultimately, the allure of Berlin was too strong to resist.
It was. So autumn of 1927, he officially takes over for Planck. Can you imagine those first few months? New city, surrounded by all these brilliant minds, those expectations?
Must have been a whirlwind. The outline says he gave his inaugural lecture in July of 27, with Planck himself in the audience. What was his focus? Did he, like, drop any new quantum bombshells?
Well, his lecture was about how to interpret quantum mechanics. Not so much new concepts, but more about his philosophical view of the wave function. And this is where those contradictions we keep talking about, they really start to show.
Contradictions? How so?
Schrödinger was wrestling with the meaning of his own WN equation. He'd created this elegant mathematical framework to describe quantum phenomena, but he wasn't entirely on board with the probabilistic interpretation, which was gaining traction among other physicists like Max Born, for example.
Right, Born, he was the one saying the wave function doesn't describe the particle itself, but the probability of finding it somewhere, right? That whole probability thing, that was a big deal, wasn't it?
Huge. And Schrödinger was one of the people who were, well, reluctant to accept a universe ruled by chance. In his lecture, he argued that the wave function should be seen as representing something real, not just a bunch of maybes.
Yeah. So he's saying, hey, my wave equation is describing something concrete, not just possibilities. But wasn't He the one who brought in this whole wave-particle duality thing in the first place? It sounds like he wants it both ways, waves A and D certainty.
That's Schrödinger, in a nutshell, always juggling seemingly contradictory ideas. This tension between the wave-like nature of quantum stuff and the desire for a deterministic view of reality, it became a hallmark of his work.
Makes me think of his friendship with Einstein during those Berlin years. Einstein famously hated the idea of probability in quantum mechanics too, right? God does not play dice.
Exactly. They connected on that, their shared aversion to a universe driven by pure chance. And their conversations about science and philosophy, they had a big impact on how quantum theory developed.
So we've got Schrödinger settling into life in Berlin, hanging out with the brightest minds of the century, lecturing, publishing, debating the nature of reality itself. What else was going on with him during this period?
Well, scientifically, his Berlin years were super productive. He kept refining and exploring what wave mechanics could do, made big contributions to, let's see, quantum scattering, relativistic quantum mechanics, even those early attempts to combine quantum theory with general relativity.
Busy guy. He was like a scientific octopus tackling all these different problems at once. But while he's making waves in the science world, his personal life, well, it continued to be, let's just say, eventful.
To put it mildly. The sources paint a picture of, well, affairs, tension with his wife, even an abortion. It seems that while he was pushing the boundaries of physics, his personal life was going through its own kind of upheaval.
It's a good reminder that even geniuses are, human. They make mistakes, they have complicated lives, and sometimes those complications have serious consequences.
Oh.
The outline mentions he faced persecution under the Nazi regime. Was he Jewish?
No, he wasn't. But he was very vocal against Nazi ideology, plus his international reputation and connections to Jewish scientists. All that made him a target.
So not directly targeted for his beliefs, but his moral stance and who he associated with, that put him in a dangerous position. It's scary how quickly things can change, how even someone so celebrated can become a victim of intolerance.
Absolutely. And as the Nazi grip on Germany tightened, Schrödinger's position in Berlin became, well, untenable. In 1933, he made the difficult decision to leave Germany, seek refuge in Oxford.
Oxford. Quite a change from Nazi Germany. But even there, his story wasn't over. In fact, this next chapter might be the most surprising of all.
You're right, because in Oxford, Schrödinger's life takes a turn even He couldn't have predicted. It leads him to a new country, a new love, and a new quest to understand, well, the very essence of life itself.
So we followed Schrödinger from Vienna through the war, those groundbreaking quantum discoveries, the Berlin years, escaping to Oxford, and now ending up in, of all places, Dublin, Ireland.
It really is remarkable how he landed there. It was all thanks to Eamon de Valera, the Irish Prime Minister. He had this vision, you see, to create a world-class institute for advanced studies in Dublin. And he saw Schrödinger as, well, the perfect person to lead it.
De Valera, the revolutionary turned politician. I never pictured him as a physics fan.
Well, turns out de Valera had this lifelong thing for mathematics, and he saw theoretical physics as, I guess, a natural extension of that. He believed Ireland could be a center for scientific progress, and getting someone like Schrödinger on board, that was a huge step towards making that happen.
So 1940, Schrödinger arrives in Dublin. World War II is raging on. What was life like for him there? Did he find, that peace and quiet he'd been searching for?
It was complicated. Ireland was officially neutral, but still affected by the war. The whole world was. But for Schrödinger, Dublin was a refuge from the chaos engulfing Europe. He settled into a routine, lecturing at the Institute, doing his research, and exploring those philosophical ideas he was always drawn to.
The sources paint a picture of a pretty unconventional lifestyle during those Dublin years. Lots of social gatherings, intellectual debates, and of course, a few romantic entanglements. Some habits die hard, I guess.
Indeed. Schrödinger's personal life, well, it never really calmed down. He had this long-term affair with a married woman, Hilda March, even fathered a child with her. And all this while still married to Annie, who, from what I gather, was remarkably tolerant of his extracurricular activities.
It's like something out of a movie. But even with all this personal drama going on, Schrödinger still managed to produce some incredible work in Dublin. The outline mentions this book he wrote, What is Life? What was that all about?
What is Life? Is a really fascinating book, kind of bridges the gap between physics and biology. It started as a series of lectures he gave in Dublin in '43, and it explores this question. How can the laws of physics explain, the phenomenon of life itself?
Wait, physics explaining biology, that's a big jump. How can equations and particles tell us anything about, living things?
That's exactly what Schrödinger was trying to figure out. He was really into the work of Max Delbrück, a physicist who'd become obsessed with heredity. Delbrück had proposed that genes, those units of heredity, they might be large molecules that could, store and transmit genetic information.
Genes as molecules, that's pretty far from quantum mechanics.
It is. But Schrödinger saw a connection. He argued that the stability and complexity of living things, it couldn't be explained by classical physics alone. He thought that quantum mechanics, with those ideas of discrete energy levels and quantum jumps, that might be the key to understanding how life works at the molecular level.
So he's proposing that quantum mechanics is at play not just in the world of atoms and photons, but in, the very fabric of living things.
Precisely. And in What is Life? He lays out how these quantum principles might explain things like the stability of genetic material, how mutations happen, even how order can emerge from disorder in biological systems.
That's some serious outside-the-box thinking. And what's even cooler is that this book, written by a physicist dipping his toes into biology, ended up having a huge impact on biological research.
It did. What is Life? Inspired a whole generation of scientists, including Watson and Crick, the guys who figured out the structure of DNA.
So Schrödinger's legacy goes way beyond that wave equation. He didn't just change physics, he helped spark a revolution in biology too. Not bad for one lifetime.
Amazing, right? It speaks to his insatiable curiosity, his willingness to cross those disciplinary lines, explore the big questions connecting different areas of science.
But it wasn't just science that occupied him in those Dublin years. The outline mentions philosophical stuff too. Reflections on consciousness, a renewed interest in Eastern mysticism, something he'd been into earlier in life. It seems like he was always searching for a deeper understanding of the universe and our place in it.
You're right. Schrödinger wasn't content with just equations. He wanted to understand their meaning, how they fit into the bigger picture. Towards the end of his life, he became more and more convinced that there was this fundamental link between the human mind and the universe itself.
That's a pretty profound idea. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Schrödinger's life, what are the big takeaways? What can we learn from this complex, brilliant, and let's face it, sometimes messy individual?
I think one of the key lessons here is that even the greatest minds can be full of contradictions. Schrödinger was a man who embraced scientific rigor, A&D, philosophical speculation, romantic passion, A&E intellectual pursuits. He was a product of his time, but also a visionary who helped shape the future.
It's that ability to hold those seemingly opposite ideas at the same time. That's what I find so fascinating. It's like he understood that the universe and life itself, it's full of paradoxes. And maybe it's those paradoxes, those unresolved tensions that keep us searching, keep asking questions, keep exploring.
You've got it. Schrodinger's life and work, they show us the power of curiosity, the importance of challenging assumptions, and the beauty of finding connections between seemingly unrelated things. He reminds us that the journey of discovery is never truly over, that even when we think we have answers, there are always more questions waiting to be asked.
Makes me wonder what Schrödinger would think of the world today. Quantum computing, AI, bioengineering, we're pushing the boundaries of knowledge in ways he could only have dreamed of. What would he celebrate? What would he critique? What new questions would he be asking? I guess we'll never know for sure, but it's something to think about.
Absolutely. And that spirit of inquiry, that's what fueled Schrodinger's life, and it's something we can all tap into. So go out there, be curious, ask those big questions, and who knows, you might just stumble upon your own groundbreaking discoveries along the way.